This is the New Yorker Hotel. It's got a big sign, it's right by a Taco Bell cantina, and I've sent my outside correspondent Amy to steal it. Why? Because apparently you can. A guy named Mickey Beretto did it a couple years ago in a story that involves legal loopholes, an infinite housing hack, and, because this is half as interesting, a loose link to North Korea. But let's start with the hotel. The New Yorker opened in 1930, boasting 41 floors and over 27 acres of space. Hillary Clinton conceded the 2016 election in its ballroom, and Nikola Tesla died in room 3327, which I don't know how we know because there was a do not disturb tag on the door. You can't open a door that's there. We should be in a Schrodinger's Tesla situation. Upon opening, the New Yorker had a whole power plant, an ice rink, and a staggering 2,503 rooms, with the cheapest going for just $3.50 a night. In June 2018, Mickey Beretto paid $257 for a one-night stay in room 2565, but he turned it into a roughly $1,826 for one deal, staying 5 years without paying another cent. By 2019, he was listed as the hotel's owner. Most versions of this story characterize Beretto as exploiting a loophole in New York's rent stabilization law, which is partially true. That was the law he used, but he used it exactly as it was intended. The Rent Stabilization Act hit the scene in 1969 to help keep at least some portion of New York's housing stock affordable. Its more well-known parts regulate how much landlords can raise rent in certain apartments. But since 1981, the law has covered certain hotel rooms too. Ones in hotels that had at least 6 rooms total that were built in or before July of 1969 and which rented those rooms for less than $88 a week as of May of 1968. This isn't a loophole. In fact, hotels and other transient living spaces were made part of the stabilization law in 1981 to close a loophole. Before they were regulated like this, landlords could dodge stabilization by converting an affordable apartment into an unaffordable hotel room. But with these rules in place, it didn't matter if you called the building an apartment building, a hotel, a boarding house, the law had you covered. It allows guests in covered hotels, like the New Yorker, to request a 6-month lease on their hotel room at a discounted rate and become permanent residents. Officially, they have the right to so-called customary hotel services, getting their sheets washed at least once a week, having their furniture repaired as necessary, and 24/7 staffing in the lobby. The only exception here is that if the hotel didn't offer one of those things in 1981, they didn't have to start just because you got a lease. But even though this part of the law is intentional, it seldom gets used. Hotels rarely, if ever, tell their guests they have the option to go Zack and Cody mode, and most people just don't know. However, Matthew Hannon, Mickey Beretto's partner on that fateful night in 2018, was not most people, and according to Beretto, Hannon told him about the rule during their night there. Which I totally believe, because who hasn't booked one night in a hotel in the city you live in, learned that night that it was subject to a little-known rent regulation, finagled yourself 5 free years there, then fumbled the bag so hard you faced jail time? I've actually done that twice. Comment below if you've done that twice. So the morning Beretto was supposed to check out, he asked for a 6-month lease, and they were like, "No, get out," and took his bags out of his room when he didn't check out. So he went straight to housing court and said he got illegally evicted. A few months later, they held a hearing, and the New Yorker was so unworried about it that they didn't even send someone to represent them. But thanks to the stabilization law, the judge ruled in Beretto's favor, and he became a permanent resident of the New Yorker Hotel. Now, you might be wondering if you could pull this off, and, well, maybe. It's hard to know how many hotel rooms out there are actually subject to the Rent Stabilization Act, or which ones they are. One article estimates that there are about 51 hotels in New York that this might apply to, with something like 3,865 stabilized rooms in the mix as of 2017, but even they admit the data they were working with could be totally off the mark. So if you want to steal a hotel, you may have to go with the guess and check method. As for Amy, she misunderstood what I was asking when I asked her to steal the New Yorker, so when it wouldn't fit in her bag, she just went to the Taco Bell cantina, which I better not have paid for. Getting his room key back would have been a good place for Beretto to stop. I mean, he gets to pay next to nothing to live right across from the Taco Bell cantina. But like Icarus in the sky or me in a buffet, he went after more and more until he basically destroyed himself. The judge's ruling in his favor didn't say the hotel had to give him a lease, limit his stay, or even demand he pay rent. It did say he had, quote, possession of his room, and it turns out, if you squint, possession looks a lot like ownership. So he brought the judge's order to the Department of Finance, which records who owns what, to get the deed to his room put in his name. But the hotel isn't broken down by room in the department's database. The only ownable property there is the entire hotel. So Beretto was like, okay, then that's what I possess. And after 6 failed attempts to get the deed in his name, the 7th went through and he became the recorded owner of the New Yorker Hotel. How is this possible? Well, turns out, when the government looks over a deed transfer, they're mostly looking for technical stuff. Is it notarized? Is it on the right paper? Most people aren't trying to mess around, and even if something fraudulent gets on the record, it's still fraud, so catching it at the front doesn't matter as much. Deed or not, Mickey Beretto never became the hotel's actual owner. The actual owner is the Unification Church, a cult-like religious group with ties to, and y'all are gonna love this, North Korea. And because they're a church, the hotel gets certain property tax exemptions. But when Beretto put the New Yorker in his name again in 2023, it lost its exemption, and the Unification folks' taxes went up by $2.9 million. Also, Beretto tried to get the hotel's accounts put in his name and convinced the diner downstairs to send their rent checks to his room instead of the church, which they didn't, but nice try. The hotel sued Beretto a handful of times over the course of this whole saga. First to say they were exempt from the housing law, which failed because it's hard to prove whether or not you were charging $88 a week in May of 1968. They offered him leases, but he never signed one or paid, so the court let them evict him in July 2023. After the tax exemption episode, the Unification Church took him back to court for contempt, and in February of 2024, he was arrested and arraigned on 24 counts, including 14 of felony fraud. As of writing, Hannon hasn't been charged with anything. Beretto, though, could see prison time, which I really hope doesn't happen, but at least we could be pretty confident that if it did happen, he'd probably own the prison after his first night. A meal at the Taco Bell cantina is a lot like the news media landscape. It's hard to tell where everything's coming from, and it might leave you confused and a little nauseous. That is, if you don't use this video's sponsor, Ground News. They're a website and app that pulls back the curtain on media bias with tons of helpful tools that don't just tell you the news, but show you where it's coming from and what biases come with it. One of my favorite features they have is called Blind Spot, which surfaces stories that one side of the political spectrum or the other is ignoring. Like, if you get most or all of your New York City news from left-leaning sources, you probably don't know about this pilot program to distribute prepaid debit cards to migrant families in the cities. At the top of the page, you get a summary of the story, and then you can see the reliability, political leaning, and ownership of each publication that wrote about this. And with all the headlines in a row, you can see how bias shapes the narrative about this program. Ground News is a fantastic tool to help you sift through all the misinformation and bias in our news. And right now, you can get 40% off their Vantage subscription through my link, so go to ground.news/halfasinteresting or click the link in the description to support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.